The following is Miki Mistrati. He's a Danish investigative journalist who has spent a career uncovering cases of child slavery and child labour, which is rife throughout the chocolate supply chain. Miki just released a new film on the subject, and it is titled Chocolate Wars and is going to be available on Amazon Prime. Now, something devastating, absolutely devastating at the core of chocolate, which Miki makes apparent throughout this podcast, is just how easily and reliably Miki uncovered horrific stories of child theft and child labour upon every visit he made to Africa's west coast. My takeaway from this podcast is that every single big brand name that is associated with chocolate, either knowingly or unknowingly, have some form of child labour and, at the very worst, child slave labour in their supply chain. In this podcast, you can expect to hear Miki cover some of the following: the chocolate supply chain, the specific names of the brands that are at the core of this, and they really shouldn't come as a surprise to any of you. It's the likes of Lindt, Marabou, Mondelez, Nestle, Mars, Hershey's, Toblerone, Maltesers. Truly, it's all the big ones. This podcast will also cover some of the horror stories that Miki has experienced firsthand in his various investigations. Miki also looks at greenwashing and attempts to regulate all of this. Plus, as well, Miki uncovers a little bit of myth busting, why fair trade is BS, and other attempts to regulate the industry have been BS as well. Now, you all know the drill. This podcast took me 5 hours to put together, but will only take you 5 seconds to review. So pump that good juice into the algorithm, tell a mate, and as well, leave 5 stars. Because the more reviews and the more mates you tell about this show, the closer I get to meaningful sponsorship that will allow me to ramp up this show's production. Because this was, I was lucky enough to record this in person with Miki in his apartment in Copenhagen. But the only reason I was in Copenhagen in the first place was for work. But I have already booked people all throughout Europe, mostly in the UK, in Spain, in France, and Greece, lots of people in America, and I'm longing to go back to Australia and talk to some of these other people that I've been able to book there. But I just simply can't afford to do it. I can't afford to fly to a place with a bunch of equipment and film it and take all the extra time that is involved in doing that. I need more reviews. Well, I should say I want more reviews, and I'm encouraging you to review because it draws more authority towards the show, so I might be able to create meaningful sponsorship through a partner. So, I'd love to do more of these in person. I'd love to increase the production value of this show. At the top of that funnel is reviews. So if you're listening to this, swipe up that phone, pump your good juice into the algorithm. All right, you legends. Absolutely no more further ado. Here is the great Miki Mistrati. So there are a couple of specific dilemmas that your film points out. The life of the child of the slave, the cocoa farmer who uses that labor, the legal, the lawyers of all of it, and then as well the market and the demand for the chocolate. So I think it'd be good to start by taking some time to really flesh out, with those dilemmas in mind, the chocolate supply chain, starting at the grocery store and then going backwards, ending up at the cocoa plantation.
That's a long, wrong road, which is part of the problem, basically. Because I think that most people think that when they buy a chocolate bar in the supermarket, that it is basically, just something which has been produced in a factory, and that's it. And it might be some ingredients from abroad, but that's it. Yeah. But the supply chain is unfortunately very long.
But let's look at those specific dilemmas. So it starts in the grocery store, but take us backwards step by step.
First of all, the supermarket needs to get its profit. That's the very beginning of it. The supermarket doesn't have anything to do with the production. Mm-hmm. They are buying the chocolate bar from a chocolate manufacturer. And if we are talking about the giant ones people know of, that would be Mars, Mondelez, which cover like Toblerone, or it could be Rittersport, or some of the bigger brands people know of, or Fraser from from the Scandinavian countries. It's all, they're all like chocolate manufacturers. And what the way they work is they are buying the cocoa beans from either the stock market or directly from companies who are supplying cocoa beans, and there are like 3 big giant ones who sits mainly on the market. And when you look at the producers, the cocoa, the chocolate makers, they need to buy this, and then they also need to buy ingredients like sugar and other stuff I am not familiar with, but this is also, sugar doesn't just grow outside your door, so basically that's also a commodity they need to buy from several places in the world. And the thing is, the chocolate makers, if they buy it from a one of the big companies like Cargill or Lam or Barry Callebaut, that's the 3 big ones. There are more, Touton, French Touton. That you would say those 4, they sit on 90% of all cocoa in the world. And they buy it from middlemen in the countries. And we are talking about West Africa now, which means, in this case, Ivory Coast and Ghana. They are the biggest in the world, number 1 and 2, producing 65% of all cocoa worldwide.
And 40s from Ivory Coast alone.
Yes, which is like, they are the big one.
Yeah.
The thing is, when companies buying from the middlemen in the countries, then it goes through a lot of other middlemen. So before we arrive to the farmer, it is going through really a lot of hands. And you could say, and then we haven't even been talking about the money which goes to marketing and transporting and stuff and grinding and all that kind of stuff. So before the cocoa ends up in your chocolate bar, it changes hands a lot of times, and every hand need money. And at the end of the day, the cocoa farmer, when you buy a chocolate bar in your local grocery shop or supermarket, you have to know that only 6 to 7% of the price goes back to the farmer. That's the whole supply chain problem, that the one who is actually doing all the hard work, and I mean really hard, hazardous work, even if you're an adult, gets the payment of 6 to 7%, which is, in my opinion, the problem in the whole chocolate industry. You pay a very small price for the one who does all the work, and we as a consumer, we get a very cheap chocolate at the other end of the supply chain.
Isn't that a consequence of hyper efficiency in supply chains and globalization, where you have the brokers, the middlemen, who actually may take the biggest amount of cut? Because if you say 6 to 7% of the final price of a chocolate bar is only going to the farmers, I can definitely hear arguments that that's a totally reasonable amount.
6 to 7.
No, I understand. 6 to 7. You take into account packaging, you take into account manufacturing, transport, the businesses that are marketing it. Exactly like you said, you look at coffee, it's similar types of really low margins. Even you look at like financial products, super, super low margins because so many people are going through it. Is there an example, say, of a totally regulated fair trade chocolate company who's paying their farmers more than 6 to 7%?
Oh, yes, yeah. If you look at the whole system, which is bean to bar movement, it started as a movement, but now it's also a business. It's still small scale, but this is where you pay much more, up to 15 to 20% to the cocoa farmer. So there is systems, and I also know that, for instance, this is something I know because I've been looking into it. A Danish company called Mikkel Friis Holm. He's one of the most famous chocolate makers because he won the World Cup for chocolate makers 13 times, I think, 12 or 13 times. And for him, it's really important that what the farmer gets have to be a decent price, a fair price. But on the other hand, the chocolate bar he sells in the supermarket costs 19 Danish kroners, which is like, I don't know.
€3.
It's no. It's much more. It's let me see.
19 Danish crowns. 19 or 90.
No. 90.
Yes. Okay. So 11, 12 euros.
Yes. So 11 euros for a chocolate bar of 100 grams.
Yeah. So 10x the price of a Marabou, of a Pfizer, of a Toblerone Mars. Yeah, exactly.
And
okay.
so saying that it's impossible, that's just like, that's a lie. Basically just a lie. At the end of the day, it's all about how much do you want to pay for, in this case, chocolate or other commodities. So I think this is the case. But right now, consumers are demanding low prices, high quality, but those two things doesn't go hand in hand.
Yeah. So you've spent a whole career, and it's ongoing as well, looking at dirty supply chains. I just heard you having a conversation about the pork industry. You've done coffee before. I'm sure you're familiar with cotton. You've obviously extensively covered chocolate. Is there a consistent lesson that you've learned throughout looking at all these different supply chains? One where perhaps the end consumer actually isn't prepared to act ethically if it's going to cost them more?
Yes, I think things has changed from when I started digging into the chocolate industry, and that was in 2006-07, and up to now. Consumers are paying more attention to the problem, but there is a kind of so-called consumer citizen gap, which means that a lot of consumers say that they want, chocolate which is not made by child slavery or trafficking of children or anything like bad conditions for any children. But on the other hand, they say that, but they are, for reasons I wouldn't be able to tell why, but they are not actually doing much. That's the gap between what the consumers are saying and what they are actually doing. And that is the gap I'm looking at. And that's what I can see is the problem. But the gap has probably been even bigger in the past. Now it's less, but it's still there. And before that gap is removed, I don't see we will see any end of child slavery in the chocolate industry. But it's not only a matter of what consumers are willing to do, because I don't also think that in a modern world, if you are a producer of anything, I think you should have a responsibility for our planet, for our world. If you don't care about human rights or animal welfare or climate changes, and I know there are people out there who said, "Yeah, you're just a sick guy who is a privileged one who can buy whatever you like." That's, sorry for my French, bollocks, because I don't buy that. I think we all have a responsibility, especially the one who is producing it, to be part of the education of people. Who have said that it's a human right to eat chocolate or eat cheap pork or any meat from animals. I don't know where we get this from, because lots of the arguments is, oh yeah, but you're just privileged, and what about poor people? See, the thing is, it's not just about being privileged or be someone who can do whatever you like, and I can't, by the way. But I am just so focused on the fact that we are right now having modern slavery for children. And I do not understand why we allow this, why we as even less privileged people in the Western world who can allow that we are exploiting children. I think that's just extremely unfair. I'm never going to understand why we allow this in 2023.
If we're looking, I think it would be a fascinating question that you're exploring, why trying to address it trying to address the solution via hyper-consumerism versus the moral question. Because if you ask about why can we still buy a product that we know has some type of child labor on the other end, statistics from your film is that child labor has progress to end child labor has stalled. And it's in fact gotten worse. And it's correlatedly gotten worse with more information about the problem, which is just a shocking indictment on the moral behavior of the consumer. It actually isn't enough to change behavior to be told that there is really bad stuff happening down that end of the supply chain. And you see exactly the same thing in cotton with fast fashion. The consumer knows it's bad for the environment. They know the people on the other end are getting ripped off, but it's a little bit cheaper, so they get it. So I think it would be unbelievably fascinating to see what you can produce, asking that other question, trying to address the hyper-consumerism. Do you need to eat pork 5 times a week? Do you need to have chocolate every night?
Yeah, but I'm trying to say this out loud because I genuinely are fascinating by because I've been part of the changes in people's perception of chocolate today. I can't take all the credit at all, but my films has been an eye-opening for lots of consumers. But from that point to knowing about the problem to actually doing something about the problem, and I think as a consumer, you should be a critical consumer. You should ask questions about why is it that something is so cheap. I think you actually have to do that, and I want to push people more to ask those questions, because I think more and more information you get, more and more you will probably change your own habits, and that's where it all needs to start from. Let's just say the grassroots of critical consumers.
So who is the most egregious actor in the entire supply chain? Is it the first round of brokers who maybe buy up from a bunch of local plantations and then sell to the bigger broker who then sells to Mondelez? Or is it Mondelez for doing all the greenwashing to try and convince the consumer that it's fair trade, no problem? In the supply chain, in your eyes, who is the most egregious actor?
I think they walk hand in hand. The chocolate makers, the big ones, and I'm talking about the big companies like Mars, Nestle, Mondelez, the one you will face when you go to any supermarket and turn your chocolate bar on the other side and you see the brand of whoever it is. And then you have the buyers of the cocoa beans like Cargill, Barry Callebaut, Toton. I think they go hand in hand. They are as greedy as they can be. And I think this because when you look up the amount of money, the profit, the revenues and the profit they get out of this.
For example?
Yeah, but I can't remember the numbers correctly, but it's in my film. But if you look at the revenues and the profit they get every year from selling chocolate, it's just like they are not suffering. There is a lot of money. There is enough space to pay back to the one who actually do all the hard work. The problem is, if you take a company like Nestle, it's on the stock market. So the shareholders are number one. They need to keep all the shareholders happy. That's the whole idea about capitalism. And I'm not against capitalism at all. I just wanted, you pay bonuses to your employees in a company when you do a very good job for your company. Then you easily pay huge amount of bonuses. Why is it that the price for cocoa beans the last many, many years has gone down? And then the bonuses and the salaries for the big companies has going up. And the price of the chocolate bar has been quite steady. It just follow the inflation with 1% or 2%, more or less. So I think if I was Nestle or one of the other big ones on the market, I would spend much more. They pretend, well, they are saying out loud, we do a lot. We build schools, we help the local communities, but at the end of the day, it's a very small amount of money comparing to what they actually have of.
It's greenwashing.
Yes, basically it is, and I don't think they take the responsibility of doing it right for the farmers, because at the end of the day, the thing is, the farmers wouldn't use children, even trafficked children, if they could afford to pay a salary for adult workers. That's the problem. They have to do. I can't even. Well, I shouldn't blame the farmers because they are paid such a small amount of money for the raw beans that they can't afford even to live and feed their own family.
It's like €1 a kilo.
Yes.
And do you know how much land mass a kilo would be? Not mass, but surface area.
No, but if you look at it, most of the cocoa plantations are small family-owned land, and it's such a small land. It's between 4 and 6 acres.
Acres.
It's small. Yeah. I've been there so many times. So it's something you walk in few minutes, sure. Even though it's in the bush and jungle. So each family have to have the cocoa beans because someone wants to buy it, and then rest of the land is pineapples and bananas and something else they can live off. But that's why it's a lot of small farms and not like giant farms as you see in the banana plantations in Latin America, where it's like huge soil of plantations. It's just like very small. It's like a bigger garden, if you like. And this is going to feed your family.
And that's at the core of the problem, right? That makes it so unregulatable. Because if you're a broker who buys off, say, 100 family farms, and you're trying to be a regulator to check that they're meeting all the working conditions, it's not an impossible task, but it's too expensive of a task. I mean, could you explain the mechanics of why it's so hard to regulate the working conditions of the supply chain?
Because it's not, a plantation is not, I think the picture people get from a plantation is something they get from how it is in their own gardens, where you have a fence and you know exactly this is my land. We're talking about the bush in the middle of nowhere, and there are loads of trees. I wouldn't be able to say, okay, this is this guy's land, and this is this guy's land, guy's land. The thing is, it's just in kind of a disorder, and there are lots of them, and the middleman or a cooperative near that land maybe contain 1,000 farmers. So this middleman, he will buy for between 500 or 1,000 plantation owners, because it needs to be, the amount of cocoa the industry demand is a lot. So buying from 2, 3, 4 farmers would mean nothing. That's just like a drop in the ocean. That doesn't exist as a possibility. So they need to buy from bigger villages. So 1,000 would be a decent amount of cocoa farmers. But imagine, how would you go to each of those 1,000 to check that everything is right? See, the good news is the companies knows exactly where the cocoa bean comes from, because each farmers today have a barcode. And when they go to the middle station to deliver, or the middleman comes to pick it up, they have a QR code they need to scan, so they know exactly which bean comes from where and from who. So saying, oh, we don't know where the bean comes from, lie. Of course they know. Because why is it that they need this? They need to know the quality of it. That's what they are concerned about. Are the quality of the beans good enough? If not, they will tell them. And some of the rewards they give, which really is something I was shocked about, is that they are giving them pesticides. And this is something, an award some of the farmers, they told me, we get the pesticide because it's a cost. And imagine, it's not like cheap for a one family plantation. So getting free pesticides is a reward, If you're good, you get more. And I'm just like, it's toxic. It's not, we're talking about, I've seen it with my own eyes. Children walking around with a box on their back like it was a school backpack. No, it was a container for poison. Walking out into the plantation, spraying trees without any protection, either on your mouth or nose or gloves, or even without shoes. And I'm just like, whoa, how can we do this? And the companies, of course they know. They're not blind. Don't tell me that, it's shocking news for we are, the normal replies, we are against this. But do something instead of just constantly saying that you are against this. This is a break of our regulations and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, this is what they do. And I think unless they try to end it by giving a fair price, they won't be able to do the changes.
What would you have them do as a solution? Would you say, if you're in my supply chain, say you're Nestle, and you say, if you're on my supply chain and you're caught doing XYZ thing, 1, child labor, obviously unpaid labor, or even for a grown adult, like pesticides without the right amount of hazmat material, whatever, we're no longer going to buy from you. Would that be sufficient for you? Like, what is a solution in your eyes that you would like to see?
It shouldn't be that difficult. I think that the short answer would be pay people what they deserve for the work they do. it's not like more different to what you and I would ask any company for. If they ask you to work and you got like a little bit under a minimum wage in the country where you live in, you would say, no way. You know, it's not a system we have to make up. It's a system which is in place. At the moment, the problem is the farmers doesn't have a union or they have unions, but they are useless to be honest, because they don't have the power to make a strike or anything. And one of the other problem is they say, well, we are paying the minimum price in Ivory Coast and Ghana. They have a cocoa bot, which is kind of, it's the government who sets the price every year for the price of cocoa. But no one have stopped any company to say, okay, this is the minimum price, but we would like to pay more. Because the solution to this is, first of all, you need to pay a decent price. That's if you have to end any child labor, illegal child labor or trafficking of children, poverty needs to be ended as we see it today. Of course, there is lots of other solutions, because then you need to implement a kind of a system where you are monitoring in the bush that everything is done by the rules. Right now, you have, for instance, fair trade, where they say we pay a premium price and then we are checking up on the farmers. The problem is the premium price they pay is still too small. Let's just say conventional, we pay you $1 per kilo. But a premium would be $1.5. Yes, it's more, and yes, it's so-called premium. But that small more amount doesn't cover the actual cost of what it takes for a farmer to actually doing all the work which goes with this premium price. So what I've been told from many farmers is, we don't really like the fair trade because we can't afford. So many farmers are actually, unfortunately, going back to conventional production because the price they get from a premium fair trade is not enough.
So the cost to meet the standards of fair trade is not worth the trade-off of getting an increase in price. And who's to say that since the supply chain is so unregulated, you have one broker buying 1,000 local farms worth of beans, who maybe then sells to a bigger broker who's got maybe, and that slowly dominoes up to where you've got these massive Swiss companies who own 90% of the market. Who's to say that trickling more money down to the end is going to solve the problem of child exploitation?
I do.
And how?
At the end of the day, I think when anyone is really, really poor, you try to do your best to feed your family. In the Western world, in Europe, we have poverty. What happens here when people don't have any money? They, for a lot of people, would do crime. In this case, there is no crime to do in Ivory Coast, in the middle of nowhere. So I think that, can you ask the question again, just so...
So assuming that you can get more money down to the final farmer, the small farmer, is it obvious that that will then stop the child exploitation problem, or would that money just be spent elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a good question, of course, because I think just pumping money back to the farmers.
Not even pumping, just trickling.
Yeah, but still, I think it will take time. And I don't think that if you raise the price with 500% over the night, that then we won't see any child labor. I'm not that naive, because you will always find people just still find, okay, I put the money in my pocket and I still have cheap labor or not paid child labor. Because now it's in system and it has been ongoing for so many years. So I think it's naive to think that you can make the changes within a short term. That will take a lot of time before you see the actual changes. I would not think it's possible within a time frame on under 10 years. Remember, this ongoing problem has been ongoing for 25, 30 years at least, and you can't make changes in 1 minute. So 10 years, I think this is what we need to if we have to be realistic, that's how long time I think. And that's just also the reason why we have to start yesterday than tomorrow.
You first started looking into this in 2008. I would love to hear you reflect on how things have changed since then via personal experiences on the ground in these countries, talking to the farmers.
Yeah, I think the biggest changes I've seen since my first film in 2008, The Dark Side of Chocolate, and up to now, is that more people pay attention. In one hand, and on the other hand, you have, funny enough, when I started, the companies were blind, apparently. They when I approached them, I've just been reading some of my old emails from then when I was approaching Mars and Cargill and Nestle. They were just like, oh, no, we didn't know about this problem. And if you went to any websites at that point, funny enough, there was no information about it. It was not a problem. They were blind to it. Despite that it was an ongoing thing since at least 1999, where Terry Collingsworth, a human rights lawyer, was taking the big companies in US to court, or he filed them for slavery of children in the chocolate industry. So, but I was surprised at that point that they were shocked about it. Today, if you go to any website of a chocolate maker, you will see that they are, fleshing out that there is a problem and we are doing a lot. Mm-hmm. So the biggest change for the companies has been blindness to awareness. Mm-hmm. For the consumers, it's more difficult because I still get a bit shocked when people are watching my newest film, The Chocolate War, which is out on Amazon and all the big providers of videos. I'm like, people are coming or texting me or calling me saying, oh, I didn't know about this. And I'm just like, I have to stay calm and say, what the hell? How can this? I have done a really bad job because I have been so constant in what I have been doing. And we're talking worldwide. And the chocolate, my first film, The Dark Side of Chocolate, which is out on YouTube, it's been watched like millions of times. So I'm just like, oh no, why is it that the consumers didn't know about it? But again, more and more knows about it, and it's not like a hidden secret anymore. It's out in the public domain.
I think an explanation for why people might still be completely shocked about it, and I'm guilty of this as well, 100%, and I guarantee you if you just polled people walking down the street in Stockholm, they wouldn't believe you that in their Marabou there is a type of potential child labor or even child slave labor at the end of that chocolate bar. Because, I mean, you're very close to it. You know the people involved. So, it's like that bias, proximity bias. We all have it for different fields, but there's just this like naive belief and optimism that everything around us works so well. How on earth could we have a product that we're interacting with on a daily basis that has slave child labor on the end of it? Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. But the thing is, this is a life mission for me, so I'm not giving up. And no matter what any chocolate producers, makers, owners, shareholders think about me, they're gonna make me disappear before I close my mouth.
All right.
That's for sure. And one change is more. If I look at from the farmer's point of view, it is unfortunately, it looks like nothing has happened. It's absolutely the same problem for the farmers. I just had a visit from a friend from Ghana. He's a farmer and has his small farm in the middle of Ghana. The problem is the same. It hasn't changed for him. His life is the same.
And the problem is not enough money for super difficult labor. And I suppose they're so exposed to the change in the commodity price as well. And
yeah, they are, but there is a fixed price, a minimum fixed price, and the problem is that price is too small. You could ask, why is it that the government of Ghana or Ivory Coast doesn't say, oh no, we know for fact that the price is very low. If you have to have just a life where you can feed your family and your children can go to school, the price needs to be this high, because that's the government's decision about the price. The problem is they are so afraid of the companies. Beware that if you have 40% of a world market in a country like in Ivory Coast, the pressure from the companies against any government would be huge. I cannot think of a European country where an industry contained 40% of a whole country. Not 40%.
no, I want to think of one, but I can't.
No,
Maybe
I would
shipping in Greece or something.
Yeah, maybe, but I think most of, if you look at any export, it will only contain around 20 when it goes high.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously extremely fragile for the Ivory Coast to have 40% of its anyway. But what have you discovered within corruption and say kleptocracy with the Ivory Coast elites and government and the big chocolate buyers?
To be honest, I have no. I don't have any knowledge of directly corruption. Only what I've heard. So that's rumors.
Okay. Are you prepared to gossip on rumors?
No, but the thing is, still this day, a French-Canadian journalist, André Kiefer, he was digging into the corruption of the Ivorian government and some of the big companies, and that was just before I went to Ivory Coast the first time in 2006. I think in April, he disappeared and never been found again. This journalist, they didn't find his body So I presume he's killed and buried somewhere, and may he rest, and may he rest in peace. But he was digging into a dangerous area, which is corruption, of course. But I wouldn't say that I have seen with my own eyes either documents or anything where corruption is a thing. And I don't want to be stereotypical and say, of course, there is a lot of corruption in African countries, but we know from the International Transparency Organization that those countries who are involved in cocoa are also very low on the list of transparency, and corruption is high. That's the far I can go on this.
Speaking of the dangers, there is a dodgy anecdote that you gave. You found yourself in the middle of the jungle in the middle of the night. Could you tell that story, and then as well just reflect on the physical dangers of reporting on this?
See, I've been to Mali, which is the neighbor country to Ivory Coast. Why? Because I had to investigate and discover trafficking of children. A lot of children are going from Mali, which is even more poor than Ivory Coast. And it's French speaking and also native speaking, the same tribe language in Ivory Coast as in Mali. Bambara, and in my search in Mali, which is also dangerous in terms of local militias and stuff, because they are part of this in the border area between Mali and Ivory Coast. We were driving from one town to another one, and there is one thing you need to be aware of when you are driving in the bush. There is one rule: never drive when it's dark. But we had to leave the town we were in because we were digging into the traffickers, and I got footage of how the trafficking was ongoing, and people were starting to ask, it's not an area where you see lots of white guys running around with a camera, and my fixer, my local fixer, he's still a friend of mine, he said to me, we need to leave because it's unsafe to stay here in this border town because people are talking now. So we had to drive a couple of hours to the next village, and between the two, the town and the village, there are often there is roadblocks, and when it's dark in the bush, it's dark. It's like more dark than you ever can think of. And suddenly a roadblock were there, and in a really bad road. I don't even call it a road because it was not a road, but very bumpy. And then this roadblock, and suddenly we got stopped by three people with AK-47, and I'm not used to see weapons. It's not like a part of my daily life, and I have not served in the army, so I think when you see someone pointing a machine gun in your direction, I was sitting in the back of the 4-wheel drives, and we have our driver and my fixer on the front seat, and on the back seat I was sitting with my American cinematographer, and they were talking. I saw one guy on the side of the car because we had to have the light on in the car so you could see someone just standing outside. And my fixer on the front seat, he said, and they were arguing, and I saw the pointing the machine gun into the car, And at that point, I was just like terrified because, you know, it's just one trigger and then you're dead. And I remember I texted my producer saying, we are in a hold up in the middle of nowhere. If you haven't heard anything, please inform the right people. That was what I texted my producer. And then my fixer turned around and said, we need to do something. We need to give them everything we have. And I could, because I know him, normally he would say, no worries. Even for people like me, I would get scared. But in this minute, I just realized this is serious business. And we had to strip off everything we had, all our caches. And I remember one incident in that moment, because when I travel, I have trousers with lots of pockets. And I don't know why, but I put my US dollars in all my pockets. Just, you know, it's good to have a little bit of cash, your passport and your pass, and some cash. And then I took all the money beside in one pocket. We were outside the car now, and then I just realized, no, I need to empty the last pocket too. Because if I didn't do that, imagine he was asking, can I just search you? And he did find. So in one split second, I took the rest of the money and gave him everything we had. And it was a lot.
Cameras and stuff as well?
No.
Just cash?
Just cash. They don't care about your cameras.
Sure, yeah.
There are two options. Either you get kidnapped and then they want a ransom, or you pay them off. That's what it is. And they got the money, and in a very shocking experience, we drove to the next village, and I remember I couldn't sleep for days because that was, you know, something really scary for me. My cinematographer were more like, oh yeah, that's what happens here. And I'm just like, no, it could have went wrong if we were too smart in this incident.
How do you think about risk and pushing the limit? Because you've got a family, you know, you've got obligations to people. How do you reflect on that moment, but then as well think on risk?
My children, who are both adults today, they think I should quit. They think, isn't there someone else to take care of this now? I'm 100% familiar with the dangers when you travel to countries like Mali, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Benin. There is a risk. And I think...
Do you want to get it?
No, okay. It's fine. I think, you know, risk, to say that there is no risk is stupid. But you need to make some plans and not doing obvious stupid things like driving in the night. That's rule number one. And don't flash money. And don't stay the same place more than a night. When you're out in the bush, you need keep on going, because, you know, if you disappear, no one bother. No one is going to chase you down or anything. But the danger is part of the work, and I have been willing to take the risk the last 16 years. And I think it has been worth doing it, because at the end of the day, I am thinking about this as a mission where I need to help to give a voice to children in West Africa who doesn't have a voice and doesn't have the option to go to school, to give them a voice, so we can end child slavery.
Yeah, I just realized that we've gone so far. You spoke about how you've seen the customer change, the company change, and the farmer not change at all in the 15 years you've been doing it. But we've totally neglected the subject of the child labor and then as well the child slavery. So I would ask you to recall specific anecdotes about when you captured footage of childs being taken, but then as well, you have like in the film, just unbelievable stories of how brazen it is. There's this problem of vanishing children, and so I'd like to ask you, please address the child labor and child slavery specifically.
I have a few really bad experience which will never leave my my life. First of all, I remember that was in Mali. We were sitting outside a bus station waiting for traffickers to pick up children. I got the tip from a local fixer saying, this is ongoing on a daily basis, so just wait, sit and wait. And we were sitting and waiting. And then I saw a bunch of children walking into a bus. And my fixer, we had to be cautious about it because, hey, at the end of the day, the traffickers are aware that they are doing something very dodgy, let's just say criminal acts. So they are not like happy to be exposed about this. So the bus, we were able to pick a young girl out of the bus, and the bus left, and my fixers and we took her to a place, a safe place, to talk to her, and she was 12 years old. She had I don't know what it's called in English, but on her legs she had like big
Open wounds.
Yes, down her legs, and I remember I did an interview with her, asking her, with help from my fixers, to ask, what are you doing here? And then she told me that she was about to go to Ivory Coast because she have been told by an adult guy that she could get work, and she was planning to do that because her parents told her to go and find a job. And now we are talking about a distance of at least 1,200 kilometers. And she was from the north part of Mali, from a village up there. It was so heartbreaking because we saved her from being a slave in a plantation. But the thing is, which is really heartbreaking, was that I asked her, now you go back to we will make sure you get back to your family. And then she said, then my family will be really mad. They will be angry at me because I'm not coming back with money. And still this day, I'm thinking, what happened to her? Where is she? Another situation was it was another bus coming from Mali into Ivory Coast. We were on a motorbike we were following the track of the traffickers, and we went to the bus station on the other side of the border in Ivory Coast, in a very dodgy area. And this small boy, he was, I don't know, 8, 7, I don't know, very small, tiny. and he was crying. We were asking him with hidden cameras, are you Malian? Are you from Mali? And he said, yes. What are you doing here? He was waiting for his driver, Ali. And I was just asking him, where do you belong? I want to go home. And he was crying in front of us. We couldn't do anything. You know, that's just like, it's terrible to see, because I just want, in the best world we should have taken him, but we couldn't because we'll be shot, because they were like, it is a very dodgy area, and stories like this is what will never leave me, and this is the energy inside me to keep doing what I'm doing, because we need to stop this, because I don't understand why adult, and now I'm talking not about the traffickers, because the traffickers are poor people who are doing a criminal act, but it's a minor thing comparing to the need of the children. And there is only need of illegal child slaves, because there are companies who are asking for cheap cocoa, because there are consumers who are asking for cheap chocolate. Yeah.
I just don't want to leave the anecdotes and the child slavery yet, but I'm just trying to think about what are the... Okay, here's a better follow-up. So you've been to Mali, Ivory Coast, Ghana many, many, many times. Those anecdotes are horrible. How, and you'd be speculating, I understand, but how common is that situation where you genuinely have a 7-year-old girl, a 12-year-old boy sent away hundreds, thousands of kilometers from their home and told to work? How, I know it's speculation because no one knows, but how common is that?
It's pretty common. And I can tell this for sure because every time I'm traveling to the area, we see this ongoing. In last year, I did a film for Channel 4, and that was about Cadbury, which is owned by Mondelez. That was in Ghana. And there were a young girl, she was 13, and she was working in a plantation, a certified plantation run by Mondelez, which ends up in the so-called certification program chocolate in the British market or the US market. And she was working in the plantation against her will. She told that. So that was like less than 1.5 years ago. That's just a good example of it's quite common. The problem is, it's too easy to find. It's not like something I need to search for. It's quite common. You just go to random, I would say, if you go to, in the cocoa belt, go to 10 plantation, you would at least find trafficked children in 3-4 of them. And now I'm talking about Ivory Coast because that's where lots of the trafficking is ongoing, because it's French-speaking countries. And the surrounding countries are also French-speaking, like Mali, Burkina Faso. And they are going to Ivory Coast. And illegal child labor, slavery, is it's so common that I wouldn't say. I haven't went to a place where it was strictly run. If that makes sense to anyone, I would just say 10 out of 10 places I go to, you will find illegal child labor, working hazardous work with machetes. They're not going to school. They work with pesticides. Beside that, they have to keep an eye on venomous snakes. Snake bites is a quite often problem. You know, they get bitten by like dangerous snakes, brown mambas. For people who knows about venomous snakes, and they don't have like some of them have wallies, but most of them doesn't really have any than a sandal, plastic sandals or something.
It's just unbelievable to me how common it is. Like, what job are the regulators doing?
Good question. I don't know.
Truly, I mean, how can anything have a stamp of approval? It's that common.
It is.
And as you established, the supply chain is 100 small farms to 1,000 brokers to eventually the grocery store. If it's that common at the first stage, it is 100% filtrated throughout the entire system.
Yes.
So therefore, it's correct. Because one, myself included, would have the opinion it exists, but in a minority. And maybe you take a risk by having it and you could be connected. But from what you've just said, it's guaranteed in every bar of chocolate you have that is not.
Yeah, unless it's small time businesses where beans go directly to
the big boys.
Yeah, but I'm talking beans to bars. Let's just say that's no 5% or something. It doesn't even exist. And believe me, even fair trade. If you look at the fair trade movement, it's a small amount of the amount of cocoa produced in Ghana and Ivory Coast. It's still like, we're talking about fair trade like it's 50% or something. Yeah. It's like even 10%.
What about Tony's Chocoloney? Are they legit?
They do a lot to fight against child labor. Are they 100%? I'm pretty sure they would say no. But I have to say, and now friends of mine will kick off when I say this, because I think actually they are doing a good job. Is it good enough? No, but it's much better than all the other ones. The quality, you need to ask someone who is an expert on cocoa quality and chocolate quality. But I think they are challenging the big companies. What I am afraid of is when the day comes where Tony Chocoloney is sold to one of the big boys. See, not long time ago, Ben and Jerry, two guys, US, done an amazing company with ice cream. Who doesn't love the ice cream of Ben and Jerry? See, I did until I realized that they sold the company to Unilever. And when you go next time to your supermarket, take a Ben and Jerry chocolate and look at it. Does it say Unilever? Not as far as I'm aware. It says Ben and Jerry. And this is how the big companies are operating. They are buying up so-called good...
more greenwashing.
Yeah, I think so. And lots of companies have done that and do this right now. And I am afraid. I have met the creator and owner of Tony Chocoloney in Amsterdam years ago. And he sounds like a good guy, but money can be very big. So this is a message to the guy who owns Tony Chocoloney. Never, ever say yes to the money. Say yes to end of child slavery. And I have no reason to believe that he will sell it. But just if he does, that would be terrible.
So back to the trafficked children, you came across a lot of kids who had been sent away by their family to bring money back home. There is this other horrible side of it, of actually children being stolen. Can you talk about that?
Yes. I remember once I was in Mali, and we were visiting a village because my fixer knew that a village deep in Mali, very remote, he said he heard from the chief of the village that they had problems with children who disappeared from the village. So we went into the village, and I remember this very clearly because it's a traditional village, and there were lots of very small children, 2, 3, 4 years running around. But there were no like teenagers, or let's just say 8, 9, 10 years old. And I was having a chat with the chief, and he told me that hundreds of the children between 13 and 16 were missing. And I said, what? How missing? Then he said, yeah, but traffickers were promising the children of his village a job, and they would get money. So basically what they did was luring the children away from the village, and they drove them to the plantations in Ivory Coast. That's quite shocking. And think about it today. It's just like, how couldn't that story end up on the headlines? I don't ask me why. It was in my first film, and I'm just like, it's just people didn't care. I don't know. It's quite shocking.
Maybe it's just too shocking. People just can't.
Yeah,
they can't believe it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like that's a story from the 1500s.
Yeah. But the problem is what I've been seeing the last 16 years is what I thought was something from the very past, where slavery was legal, it was part of our society, and now, today, latest in Ivory Coast, where we're in 2019, before the COVID outbreak, I saw children from Burkina Faso working in a plantation, and I asked this guy, he said he was 14, he was probably younger, but he was 14 and never went to school. He's been in the plantation for 2 years and didn't know why his dad left him there, 1,000 kilometers from home. That was 2019. Just a random place I went into. Sorry to say, but saying that it's something from the past, I'm just saying this is part of our world as we speak.
Okay, so let's, just for the record, put these, say the names explicitly. Nestle, Mondelez, Cadbury, Toblerone, Maltesers, Mars. But
Nestle is covering brands. Nestle is a company, and all the brands you were talking about is actually chocolate.
But still, I more mean to create a landscape of when you go into the grocery store and look at brands, maybe it can change your psychological perception.
The thing is, I normally turn my blind eyes
Hershey's.
Hershey's. I can. You
Malibu,
want me
Milka.
to?
Run through them, seriously.
If we look at the list of guilty chocolate bars, in my opinion, we have a long list where people might know a few of them, going from Mars, Twix, Milky Way, Rittersport, Marabou, Toblerone, Kit Kat, everything with the brand of Nestle, everything with the brand of Mondelez, Hershey, Cadbury. It's endless of brands of chocolate you find in your grocery shop, and all of it cannot say that this is not made by illegal child labor or child slaves.
How do you make sense of the reputation of these companies? Given everything that you've just said and what your various films have exposed, how do you make sense of these companies having they don't have good reputations, obviously, but any reputation at all, how do you make sense of that?
I think the biggest problem is when I go to my grocery shop and see a chocolate bar and I see a brand, let's just say Cadbury or any Mondelez, and it say Cocoa Life, 100% sustainable. If I was a consumer, I would say, oh, good, I buy this because this is without any problems. The problem is, I don't get how the chocolate manufacturers, the companies, can sleep at the night knowing that they're using phrases like 100% sustainability, slavery free, or whatever free, knowing that it is not correct. I find that really disturbing, and I don't get it, because I don't think that the companies are evil. I think they know better. They are smart enough. They know about the problem. What really strikes me is, why is none of the company making a decision? Be first mover. I think they would even get a big chunk of the market if they went out and say, you know what? We have made a decision. We want to be as much as possible be 100% slavery-free chocolate. That is a decision. It will cost you a good fortune of your money, but you would do something, you will take your responsibility, and you will be first mover. And I think it will tip. All the other companies will be villains in this.
Totally.
And I think that's the way to do it. But I think the problem is they are like, now I'm saying a gang, where they have a code saying no one is going out of this circle and make any decision without the other companies are agreeing. So no one dares to walk out. But they should do.
It feels like such an oligopoly. Like I think 3 million tons was the number of chocolate is consumed every year. That comes from a handful of companies. Therefore, just a couple boardroom of executives. It's essentially at the very, very top of all of that. It could just be that it's too big. You would need such an incredible scapegoat to get away with something like that, because by doing what you just said, you would then be admitting that you knowingly had child labor and slavery in your supply chain and did nothing about it for years and years and years. It would need, a huge scapegoat. It would, you'd have to sack all the executives and then rehire them and say it's a whole new brand now. And maybe that's just too big of a hurdle for them to make. Although I do see what you mean. It would turn everyone else into a villain, and overnight you would have, through a piece of great greenwashing again, been able to change the conversation. But still,
but the funny thing is, if you look at the cigarette tobacco industry, when I was a kid, smoking was something you did advertising for in TV, but also when you billboards and stuff. Smoking was a cool thing. You were a cowboy. You were a cool guy. Then it changed, and now when you buy a package of cigarettes, it will have a big advertising outside saying that smoking kills you and you will get cancer and stuff. I have been playing a little bit with the idea of, think about if we could agree, at least in the EU, that every chocolate bar have to have a label saying this chocolate bar is made by child slaves. Until you can prove that your chocolate is not made by child slavery or child labor, you have to have that label on your chocolate. What would happen?
That'd be incredible. It'd be so disruptive. The price of chocolate would 10x overnight. But that's okay, because we don't need chocolate to survive.
No, that's my main point. It's not written anywhere that you need to have a chocolate bar anytime you like.
It would paradoxically significantly increase your satisfaction and enjoyment of chocolate, because you would have it less often, you'd have it without the guilt, and presumably the only brands that would survive are the ones that really pay attention to the chocolate.
Or would it go like the cigarette industry? You still have people smoking?
Obviously none of us know, but my instinct would say it wouldn't go the same way, because there is an addictive nature to smoking, and as
Good
well,
point.
And with smoking, you're really only hurting yourself. So when you are walking down the street smoking, you're not signaling to other people much about your character, because you know that your individual actions aren't going to affect them. But if you walk down the street eating a Mars bar that has, a picture of a child slave on it, everyone around now thinks you're a horrible person. And so from a status and signaling perspective, I think your idea would be extremely powerful.
I would love to see it.
Is there any talk of this, or is this just like one man's dream?
No, that's my dream. I've been talking to a few people about it, if it's like possible, and any government could make the decision in their parliament. Probably not a popular one, but why not?
Why not? It doesn't need to be popular.
No, I agree.
Imagine being the idiot, or not the idiot, but the douchebag trying to go against it. Saying, no, I want child slavery in my chocolate. How dare you try and change it?
I like the idea, but if it's feasible from a political point of view, I don't know.
It feels like the public wouldn't necessarily be your competition. It'd be the lobbying from these giant companies. Speaking of which, these giant companies all happen to be in Switzerland, headquartered in Switzerland. I mean, you talk about skin in the game, you talk about authenticity and credibility. Why do you have to hide in the tax haven in the middle of Europe that's outside of the European Union? You're just clearly saying to all of us, and not even trying to hide it, that you've got stuff which doesn't meet the standards of the markets that you're consuming it in. Therefore, we're in use.
Well, I have to say that historically, Switzerland has been producing chocolate since the 18th century. So Switzerland is not like a tax haven in that case, because they have been producing chocolate for so many years. Lindt, for instance, is from, I think, 1870s or something. And so Switzerland was a home for chocolate very early in the history. And also in Britain, you have like a few really early stage chocolate manufacturers. And it was like the privileged people. It was a luxury. It was like caviar or something at that point. It was not like for the massive like it is now, just mainstream.
Okay, so you're suggesting it's not necessarily all a political move that they're headquartered in Switzerland?
No, it's just because they've been there for ages.
Yeah. We forgot Lindt. Lindt is egregious as well?
No, they are really bad.
Okay. And are they their own company, or does someone own them?
It's a family-run company, but with some shareholders. I've just been there on a private visit to the factory, just to see. No, they didn't know. I was just like walking in. So no, they didn't know about me and my present, but I just was curious about what they, on this museum of chocolate, to see how they present themselves and the issue about cocoa, about chocolate, child slavery and child labor. They didn't mention it with one word.
Wow. Yeah. Again, it's just greenwashing. Well, what are the most, in your own experience, the most egregious examples of greenwashing that you've seen from these different companies?
I still think the biggest issue is that you see lots of smaller companies be bought up by bigger companies, and they don't do anything to mention that we own the chocolate bar now. I think that's really disgusting in a way. I remember when Black and Green was a chocolate brand I thought was a good one. They were in the past, but they got bought up by Mondelez, or Kraft Food first and then Mondelez. And still this day, when you see green and black, I think a lot of people think, oh, they're the good ones. So I think this is the way to greenwash, is to buy up well-known good brands. And you have the latest one was Ben & Jerry Eyes, bought by Unilever. And I think this is how they operate now. They're buying up good companies. Hopefully, some of the good ones are not for sale, even though they come with a big red suitcase full of cash.
Mm-hmm. Mikey, just to round out this interview, I'd like to hear you reflect on, say, the second, third, fourth order consequences of having child labor and child slavery in the cocoa belt of Africa, from what you've seen and what you've read about.
Some of the hidden consequences is a longer term one, which really makes me sad, that children are working with pesticides. No one knows about it. No one discusses it. And the second thing is, I really makes me sad, is that we're talking about children who want to go to school. They don't go to school. That's also something it's not something we are talking about. We're talking about they're working as workers in the plantation, but they're not going to school. That's a sacrifice, because I think, any children should be allowed to go to school. A third thing is, I think poverty today is something people, at least in the Western world, doesn't want to talk about anymore. Poverty is a huge problem and is the core problem. Poverty, before we end poverty, and it's never going to happen at all, there will always be, but we have the money to solve it. Today we have too few people in the world who owns too much. I don't need to mention anyone, but a few would be Bill Gates, Elon Musk. You have all Mark Zuckerberg. I can't even say how much money they have, but all the richest people in the Western world will be able to solve the problems for children, at least the children. That would make me happy if Bill Gates or some of the other ones who say they do a lot were calling me and say, "Hey, Miki, please help us out. We want to help you fixing this problem." And I would be so pleased.
So what would you do if I could get you 10 billion euros paid out 1 billion a year for the next 10 years? What would you do with the money?
I would try to make it possible for all children of West Africa to go to school. Pay the family the money so they can put the children at school. I think that's where children belongs, not in a cocoa plantation doing hazardous work.
And is it a question of money, or is it political corruption that there aren't more children going to school in West Africa?
I think it's a combination of both.
Sure. Okay. Complex.
Yes.
Okay, final question on this topic. You've covered the coffee supply chain as well. I'm sure you've seen that the cobalt supply chain, people are speaking quite a lot about now. How much similar incentives are happening here with the cocoa supply chain that are driving children to labor and slavery as well? Or are there differences?
All commodities are, which is produced in, for instance, in African countries, there is a huge risk of children working hazarded. It doesn't matter if it's coffee or cocoa or sugar or rubber or cobalt mines. It's a big issue out there. But remember, it's not an African thing, because you find child labor in other places in the world, in Asia, in Latin America, even in Eastern Europe, you will find this. So it's a huge problem. We are talking about millions of children who are working instead of going to school. And I know that UN is trying to emphasize this every year when it's the year of children, and we have to talk about slavery, and the numbers are enormous. But I don't see much action from each countries. At the end of the day, it's a matter of each country to take action, and I can just inform people, the consumers, about it. And if they are critical enough, they stop buying chocolate made by child labor, because that's a possibility. You have alternatives. Yes, it's more expensive. Yes, you won't be able to eat as much as you like, but you would do something really good for other people, in this case children.
Just finish with this statistic from the film. In the last 4 years, there has seen an 8 million increase in child labor, making that 160 million child labor worldwide.
Yeah, I think the numbers are talking for itself. It's terrible.
It's a ridiculous number.
Yeah, it is, and
There's 5 million people in Denmark. There's 160 million child labor worldwide. And I don't know how those statistics are collected, but you would also assume that a lot of child labor does not go noticed. Therefore, whether it's underinflated or, yeah.
Right, yeah, agree.
Mikey, 2 questions I ask every single guest. It's got nothing to do with children. It's got nothing to do with chocolate. First being, what is a country you're particularly bullish on?
Good, yeah. I think we should be more open to investment in African countries. There are lots of businesses in African countries, and I think that would be my place to invest anything, basically, because I think we have missed the opportunity to see how fruitful and big markets you have in Africa. I think now more and more investment companies are looking to Africa, because I think that's the place to be if you see the next big growth in finances.
And if you could witness a conversation between any 2 people of history, listen to a podcast, no language barrier, they can have lived at different times, dead or alive, no problem, who are you listening?
Jesus and Muhammad.
And what are they talking about? Gabriel.
How to fix the broken world.
Okay. I don't know if either of them have the answers.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, are you a atheist Dane, or are you a religious Italian?
A little bit of both.
Okay, nice. Well, look, Mikey, I can't thank you enough for giving me this amount of time. Your home is absolutely beautiful, and your work is amazing, truly. So I really hope more people go and watch your films and support what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me, and have the opportunity to give people a little bit of information. As I always say, I'm not judging anyone. If you like to continue buying cheap chocolate, do that, but just be aware that you are supporting child labor and child slavery.
Nice note to finish on.